It's a heck of a week on the Hill with Bob Barr, Candace Owens, and AOC, plus President Trump's undocumented immigrant rehousing plan coming to a sanctuary city near you. All ahead on this week's Uprising.
LibertyNation.com. They are the resistance, but we are the uprising. With Scott Cosenza and Tim Donner.
There's not going to be a President Donald Trump.
Hey, a president. Can you believe it?
I love the poorly educated.
The voters have guaranteed themselves slavery, economic disaster.
I can't believe I'm losing to this guy.
You could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
I have never met with Russians.
Our elected representatives can abuse subordinates and then secretly use a slush fund of our money to pay them off.
Black Lives Matter, the Antifa movement, is interested in preserving the fabric of America.
Welcome to The Uprising, a podcast of LibertyNation.com. I am your host, Scott D. Cosenza. Well, we didn't get the Mueller report this week, at least not into the wee hours of Saturday morning as we record the show, but Bob Barr, Attorney General Barr, did go to Capitol Hill this week, both for Senate and House hearings. Ostensibly, they were budget hearings to discuss the Justice Department budget moving forward, but really they were excuses to examine him on Mueller and the Mueller report. Let's take a listen first to Nina Lowy on the House side for her question for General Barr.
Let me tell you what I'm getting at that I find quite extraordinary. You received a very serious, detailed report, hundreds of pages of high-level information, weighed the factors and conclusions at length, outlined, prepared, edited, and released your memo in less than 48 hours. To me, to do this, it seems your mind must have been already made up. How did you do it?
The question of how the decision was made to prosecute or not prosecute Trump for obstruction of justice, I think we're going to be hearing about that for months, if not years or decades ahead. So it's certainly a fair question for a skeptical congresswoman, and she should be skeptical. And I just want to say it's refreshing to hear a question not designed for to produce a clip for YouTube or a fundraising letter, but seemingly just to get an answer to that question. So let's all have a listen to the Attorney General himself describe how he was able to do it without prejudging or preloading the decision in favor of President Trump.
The thinking of the special counsel was not a mystery to the people at the Department of Justice prior to his submission of the report. He and his people had been interacting with the Deputy Attorney General and lawyers supporting the Deputy Attorney General in his supervision of the special counsel. And in that context, there had been discussions. So there was some inkling as to some of the thinking of the special counsel. Furthermore, on March 5th, I believe, the deputy and I met with Special Counsel Mueller and his team and had a preliminary discussion about the report. So we had an inkling as to what was coming our direction. And so even more thinking within the department was done about that over that time. That was a matter of weeks. And then when the report came, and it came approximately midday on Friday, the Deputy Attorney General and I and our staffs worked closely for the balance of that day, Saturday and Sunday.
They had been thinking about it for weeks. I think there's perhaps a misconception that, and part of this has to do with people simply stating the words incorrectly, that the special counsel is an independent counsel. We used to have an independent counsel statute on the books federally. That's how Ken Starr was appointed under the independent counsel statute, and he was independent. He did not work directly under the Attorney General in that command structure. The special counsel, however, is a a person who reports to the Attorney General, which is what Bob Mueller did. So it wasn't like there was some wall where Mueller couldn't hear about any of this evidence or know about it. He could hear about it, and he did hear about it. So he didn't have just a couple days to make his decision. He had weeks. Let the record reflect. Okay. Now we'll get another lesson in our federal criminal laws from the Senate side with Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy. Of all things, he wants to know if Mueller wanted Congress to weigh in on the obstruction charge.
Did he express any expectation or interest in leaving the obstruction decision to Congress?
Not that he didn't say that to me, no.
So he said the obstruction decision should be up to you?
He didn't say that either. But that's generally how the Department of Justice works. Generally, grand juries are to investigate crimes, and a prosecutor's role at the end of the day is binary. Are there charges or no charges? Or is this a crime or not a crime?
To say that it makes no sense for a special counsel to ask Congress to weigh in on a decision to prosecute, it doesn't even make any sense to kind of talk about it in those terms. I don't understand how Mr. Leahy perhaps was asleep when they taught separation of powers back in school. The prosecutors, the Justice Department, is an executive agency. Congress can make no ruling that the executive agency needs to prosecute somebody. A decision to prosecute anybody for anything is an executive decision. It is not a legislative one. It would be totally inappropriate for Mueller to say that. He can't cede the power of the executive to the legislature. It's ridiculous. For those of us who say that the president can't be prosecuted for obstruction of justice, that's why we're saying it, because the president himself would have to prosecute himself for obstruction of justice. It's an executive decision, and he is the executive in charge. Now, that doesn't mean that he's above the law, because the law provides for impeachment. So, if he did do that, that would be a high crime or misdemeanor. Therefore, Congress has the remedy of, you got it, impeachment and removal from office. That's how a Congress can address criminality in the executive. I can tell you as soon as this report comes out, the Democrats who want to see Trump gone are going to be able to find evidence for obstruction in many different places. And they'll be able to say, oh, there's obstruction here and there's obstruction there. Well, but there's not a decision to prosecute obstruction. So bring your case to the people, bring it through impeachment proceedings that we know so many Democrats wish to run with, and make the case. But to spin the wheels and act like General Barr is somehow playing dirty or fast and loose with the facts in order to help his pal Donald Trump, well, that just doesn't hold water. Absent any evidence to the contrary, that can be rejected out of hand as an attempt at what it is, to sort of paint the process as corrupt rather than their own motivations. For his part, the Donald spent the week busying himself with our nation's immigration woes. Let's have an update.
On the boats and on the planes, they come into America.
It's a colossal surge, and it's overwhelming our immigration system, and we can't let that happen. So as I say, and this is our new statement, the system is full, can't take you anymore. Whether it's asylum, whether it's anything you want, it's illegal immigration, can't take you anymore. We can't take you. Our country is full, our area is full, the sector is full. Can't take you anymore. I'm sorry, can't happen. So turn around. That's the way it is.
You know, there's just something so refreshing about Donald Trump, and one of the reasons why, in spite of himself, you can think it's great that he's president. He goes on to talk about the problems that we have with our immigration system. And I speak as generally somebody who's in favor of open immigration. But it need not be a suicide pact, that open immigration. And to say that the system itself is anything other than completely broken is to be dishonest. If we just let people in, seemingly as Democrats now want, how would that not overrun the system? Here's the president with a critique of that system.
They come up, in many cases, they're rough gang members. In many cases, they're people with tremendous crime records. And they're given a statement to read by lawyers that stand there waiting for them. Read this statement. And it says, I have great fear for my life. I have great fear for being in my country, even though in some cases, some of these people are holding their country's flags and waving their country's flags. And then they talk about the fear they have of being in the country, that the flag they were waving freely. So we are looking at the possibility, strongly looking at, to be honest with you. California, the governor wants to have a lot of people coming in, refugees coming in, a lot of sanctuary cities. So we'll give them to the sanctuary cities maybe to take care of if that's the way they want it, because we can only hold them under the current law for 20 days.
You heard that right. The president of the United States says we're just going to pile these illegals into the sanctuary cities because obviously they're okay with them. It's pretty hilarious. It's totally illegal. And they walked it back later on. But to say that he wasn't serious about it is absolutely not true. He was serious about it. It's one of the things that's refreshing about Donald Trump. Not that he didn't know it would be illegal to do. I mean, to punish members of Congress in where they distribute these illegal alien refugee types. See, this just demonstrates his unfitness for office. If you're more suave, if you're more Obama-like, you don't ever state your illegal intentions. You just go ahead and do it. And then you say, well, the undersecretary investigated the various potential locations for a refugee camp and decided that Golden Gate Park was ideally suited for various reasons. And that's how you do it. That's the Washington way, not just stating your intent to punish the sanctuary city congresspersons, which, if there were any doubt that was his intent, here we go again.
So in sanctuary cities, as per your question, we are giving very strong consideration to having people after a 20-day period, because, again, you're not allowed legally to hold them for more than that. We will move them into sanctuary cities.
When you listen to politicians for so long, it's hard not to be overwhelmed by the refreshing nature of his honesty, at least. And when he gets into describing those foreigners who come to our country bearing the flags of the countries they were from as if they're rooting for them, like a soccer team or a football team, and yet they do claim that they want sanctuary in this country. It is. He's got his thumb right there on, I think, a vision that disturbs many Americans who would be charitable otherwise with entry to this country for people who wish to become Americans and not wish simply to come here and enjoy American largesse while maintaining identity from the place they claim to be refugees from. And I say claim there because I think President Trump's statement about how the asylum seekers are given statements by lawyers to read is true. We know that, and not to get the crazy conspiratorial now, but Soros-funded groups, for instance, they do send armies of lawyers down to the border to prime these people and tell them, if you say X, Y, and Z, you will be let into the country. If you say something else, you will not be let into the country. That's actually sound lawyering, but it's also not exactly likely to yield the most genuine representations of asylum seeker status. All we need to do, if you're a person who wants an increase in immigration to this country, is let's reduce the cost of immigrants. So let's make them more responsible for themselves, or make more private groups responsible for themselves. And you could have a system where people are required to guarantee that somebody comes into the country that they vouch for won't go on welfare or be a drain on the system, a sponsorship model. There are many ways we could accomplish the goal of allowing more immigrants to the country without burdening the Americans that are here with confiscatory taxes in order to pay for them. It might also help to dial down the wokeness and racial identity politics, because I'll tell you what, if there's team black versus team brown versus team white versus team whatever, you're likely to see more accommodation made if it's just about individuals rather than teams of this and that group that you're looking to pit against each other. Speaking of pitting groups against each other, let's turn our attention to Al Sharpton and his National Action Network. They had a big event this week, and one of the best things to come out of it was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her black dialect she went into when addressing the crowd.
Thank you all. Thank you, Reverend. Thank you all so much for coming together and gathering today, because this is what organizing looks like.
That's right.
This is what building power looks like. This is what changing the country looks like.
Now, I don't think this is something to get too excited about, because the accent, that is. It's not like Hot Sauce Hillary and her pandering. You get the sense that AOC was just sort of slipping into it naturally, rather than a sort of poll-tested kind of, a committee didn't tell her that this is what how she should be speaking. If you don't remember, Hillary was on a podcast, a black hosted podcast, Breakfast Club, when she trotted out that she carried hot sauce around with her in the last. In fact, let's play it. Including, there was a beautiful candid. Well, listen to the end. That's the real Hillary.
No more questions? They said no, she has to go.
What's something that you always carry with you?
Hot sauce.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Are you getting information right now, Mr. Hot sauce. Hot sauce in my bag, Swag?
Hot sauce.
Really?
Yes.
Now, listen, I just want you to know, people are going to see this and say, okay, she's pandering to black people.
Okay. Is it working?
Not enough, Hillary. Just wasn't working enough. Well, let's get back to AOC addressing the assembled.
Reverend, you bring up a funny anecdote, and I'm proud to be a bartender. Ain't nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with working retail, folding clothes for other people to buy. There is nothing wrong with preparing the food that your neighbors will eat.
Oh, girl, go on.
There is nothing wrong with driving the buses that take your family to work. There is nothing wrong with being a working person in the United States of America, and there is everything dignified about it.
If you didn't know, what that is all about is Donald Trump insulted AOC by saying that the Green New Deal done by a young bartender, 29 years old, a young bartender, wonderful woman. So that's her rebuke to him, that this is all dignified work, which, of course, he never said it wasn't. But you know what's not dignified work in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's world? Any work at all that doesn't pay at least $15 an hour. That's right. If you can't command $15 an hour for your labor, AOC doesn't think your work has dignity. In fact, she thinks you should be locked up, as well as the person who you convinced to pay you the less than $15 an hour for selling your labor for less. You should just go on welfare and shut up, I guess. And that's a great lead into our next story about Candace Owens and what happened at the hate crimes hearing on the Hill. But before we get to that, the other thing is, it's not cool to associate with Al Sharpton. I guess Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is probably too young to remember Freddie's Fashion Mart or Tawana Brawley, but Al Sharpton was somehow able to rehabilitate himself through the Obama presidency. But I haven't forgotten. And the residents of Crown Heights haven't forgotten, and neither should you forget that Al Sharpton is an anti-Semite and an anti-white bigot with blood on his hands. You know, that's how Al Sharpton gets his powers, by dividing people on the basis of their race, by creating that division, by nurturing and watering and giving sunshine and playing music for hatred, for racial division, because that's how Al Sharpton gets his power. He's not talented in any particular way that gives him great money and influence, or influence that he can then turn into money. That's his hustle. So he can't say, I want to be a powerful person, so please support me. Nobody's going to do that. He has to rally them around a cause. Well, the easiest and most effective way to do that, the low-hanging fruit, is their racial identity. And that's what he does. That's what he exploits. And once in a while, he probably does a good job actually demanding justice for some underrepresented person who wouldn't otherwise get it. But mostly, what he does is tries to use racial differences in order to elevate his own position in power and to make money. And that's why he should be rejected by people who wish to be taken seriously, like congresspersons. Have you heard the charge that Democrats don't wish blacks to succeed, and even black identity, progressive Democrat groups don't want blacks to succeed because then where would their power come from? Well, I've heard that a little bit, but I don't think that many Democrat politicians have heard it in Congress, and that's what Candace Owens brought to the table this week with her testimony before the House Committee on Hate Crimes, where she appeared as the victim survivor of hate crimes against her because she was a conservative, as well as just generic anti-black racist people telling her that they were going to bomb her house and calling her the N-word. And that was the son of the former governor of Connecticut. Yeah, that's right. That's who did the hate crime to her. And here she is talking about how the NAACP, how they used her, for instance.
The media turned it into a firestorm, and it became a political tool for people to gain power. The NAACP used me at that time, would just meet me outside of the school with cameras in tow to speak out against the crimes. Of course, now I'm older, and I realize that that's really just a fundraising mechanism, and that a lot of these groups survive because they cannot have the problem fixed, ever. The NAACP never wants racism to go away.
Ms. Owens is terribly inconvenient for the progressive left because she is a black woman who was a victim of a hate crime, and yet at the same time stands up and says no to the whole Democrat progressive victimhood industry mentality political movement. Well, that's untenable for them. So what happens? Well, if you haven't heard the clip, Ted Lieu, a Democrat congressman from California, goes full on, she's a Nazi.
All right, so my first question is to Ms. Hirschenoff. Ms. Owens said, quote, if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. So when people try to legitimize Adolf Hitler, does that feed into white nationalist ideology?
Of Eileen Hirschenoff, another witness from the Anti-Defamation League, and we'll get to her in just a second, but Ms. Owens can't respond because the question wasn't asked to her. So he calls her a Nazi sympathizer, basically, and then addresses the question to somebody else. But thankfully, another Republican basically gives her the floor after that to respond to Mr. Lieu. And here's what she has to say.
Yes, I think it's pretty apparent that Mr. Lieu believes that black people are stupid and will not pursue the full clip in its entirety. He purposely presented an extracted clip.
The witness will suspend for a moment. It is not proper to refer disparagingly or to a member of the committee. The witness will not do that again. The witness may continue.
Sure, even though I was called despicable.
The witness may not refer to a member of the committee as stupid.
I didn't refer to him as stupid. That's not what I said. That's not what I said at all. You didn't listen to what I said. May I continue?
Please.
As I said, he is assuming that black people will not go pursue the full 2-hour clip.
And of course, we learn that she did not, in fact, defend Adolf Hitler at all. She was talking about nationalism, and in that capacity was discussing him. And if it's a surprise to you, she's not calling for genocide, nor is she in defense of it when Hitler did it. But hey, that's not that wasn't the point anyway. The point was merely to get her off the point and get everybody else off the point. The self-appointed groups that advance black people's interests may not be advancing their interests, and in fact, may be harming their interests. Well, that's a message that Candace Owens is spreading, and it's one they cannot abide because it will mean their electoral destruction, their political irrelevance. And so it must be stopped at all costs. So we have the reductio ad Hitlerum. Well, let's turn our attention back to Ms. Eileen Hershinoff. She's from the Anti-Defamation League, and she was brought to the committee, as best I can tell, to defame President Donald Trump, who she lets us know when he goes to be president, that's when racism explodes in the country. Not that it's his fault or anything.
And the report that we released today shows that there was an increase, a doubling, 100% doubling of anti-Semitic slurs and content on the channels that the murderer, Bowers, in Pittsburgh, and the murderer in New Zealand looked at, and Gavin Aitchan, and a huge increase in racism since the 2016 election. I am not saying that anybody, one person, one elected official caused that, but there are corollaries there that we need to understand and we need to look at. We need to look at the data.
I'm not saying that President Trump has anything to do with it, but at the same time, President Trump has something to do with it, and that's what we need to look at. Well, what does the data show us? Does it have anything to do with the fact that the mainstream media and you and your allies have been driving a narrative that if you support Donald Trump, you are a racist, you are a white supremacist? Could that have something to do with it? Who is dividing the world up into tribal lines, whether it's race or sex or anything else? Is it Donald Trump or is it the left who's telling you in every way possible that it's all about what you look like or your immutable characteristics that are the important ways to classify people? So let's couple that racial identity push along with the other push, which is that if you happen to be white, you're not allowed to have a racial identity that's any good, or if you're male, or if you're heterosexual. In fact, it's so important. From the same hearing, I couldn't believe it when I heard it. This is Kristen Clark of the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, which is an organization for racial justice and economic justice. That means it's commie, by the way, because what you want, if you want freedom and liberty, is individual justice. Racial justice means the color of your skin is what's important, or economic justice means if you're rich or poor is important, rather than your individual actions. She's so bought into racial identity and politics that the one concern that she brings before the committee, now let's remember this is the Committee on Hate Crimes, is that the FBI has developed a category for black people that wish to commit crimes against others because of racial hatred. Let's take a listen.
The final thing that I will note is that we're deeply concerned about the FBI's Black Identity Extremist designation. This is mere distraction from the very real threat of white supremacy that we face today.
Why is that distraction? Why is that a distraction? a distraction?
Because it is not real. It is not a real threat. It harkens back to the dark days of our federal government abusing its power to go after civil rights activists during the heyday of the civil rights movement. There is no such thing as black identity extremism. Again, this is mere distraction to take the public's attention and the government's resources away from white supremacy and white nationalism, which are the real threats that we're up against today.
Now, the black identity extremist designation is not opposed because it's been applied wrongly. And she's not saying, oh, well, the FBI is spending the same amount of time and money on black extremists as white supremacists. And since there are many more white supremacists, that's a problem of resource allocation. No. That's not her argument. Her argument is that any recognition by the FBI that there may be black people motivated by race when they commit attacks on others is completely unacceptable. Well, it just doesn't fit her worldview and narrative, right? Guess again. It's breathtaking. Black people can't commit a hate crime because they're black? That's what you get when you have collective notions of justice or notions of justice that don't have to do with individual behavior and activity. Look, the right answer for all these questions of justice is what your mom should have taught you when you were a kid, which is keep your hands to yourself. That goes for everyone. That's the rule for everyone. Keep your hands to yourself, and then we don't have to worry about what race you are, what your identity is, what sex you are, or anything else. There was a case a few weeks ago out of New York where a black trans woman was assaulting white people because they were white. She would say, basically scream at them a bunch of curses because they were white and spray pepper spray in their face. I think she got like 8 or 9 people. Now, this is a transsexual black person. Are they incapable because they're trans or because they're black of committing crimes against other people on the basis of their immutable characteristics? Well, that's what the Lawyers Committee of Civil Rights would have you believe. I guess it's the Lawyers Committee, though, for civil rights just for some people. The rest of us, well, we just don't have the complexion for the connection. April 13th is Christopher Hitchens' birthday. I've been trying to sell you on Christopher Hitchens' Memorial Day, and there is a great Hitchens quote on point here, as so many are. For those who think that being in the popular majority is somehow protection from the consequences of their ideas that they support and espouse, it is not. I'll leave you with Mr. Hitchens. Thank you so much for joining us. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell a friend. This is Scott D. Cosenza for LibertyNation.com, your home for conservatarian news and analysis, 24/7, 365 at LibertyNation.com. Bye-bye.
Don't take refuge in the false security of consensus and the feeling that whatever you think, you're bound to be okay because you're in the safely moral majority.